In the vast stretches of space, far beyond the familiar borders of human-controlled sectors, lay a small colony called Erindor. It was not just a dot on the star maps. It was a thriving hub of life, hope, and dreams for thousands of people who had left Earth generations ago. Erindor was known for its lush biodomes, advanced farming systems, and research stations that specialized in both technology and medicine. The colony was a symbol of human resilience, proof that humanity could survive and even flourish in places that seemed completely inhospitable. Its citizens had built homes, schools, hospitals, and markets. Children played under artificial suns, laughter echoing through the city streets, and families worked together to keep the colony self-sustained. For years, life in Erindor was peaceful, and the people took pride in what they had accomplished so far from the comfort and protection of Earth. But peace is often fragile, especially in a universe filled with unknown dangers. Beyond Erindor's protective shields and advanced defense systems, there were species and civilizations whose intentions were far from peaceful. The colony's leaders had long been warned that being isolated made them vulnerable. Earth had treaties with other human colonies and was aware of nearby alien factions, but for many of these distant colonies, help could take weeks, months, or even years to arrive. Erindor had relied on its defenses and the hope that its distance from major conflicts would protect it from direct threats. At first, it seemed like that hope was justified. There had been skirmishes and minor attacks, but none had ever come close to threatening the entire colony. People often spoke about those early incidents with a sense of pride they had faced danger and survived. Everything changed when the first wave of alien attacks hit. The attackers were not like anything humanity had encountered before. They were fast, relentless, and highly organized. Their ships moved like shadows through space, striking at the colony with pinpoint accuracy. Energy weapons cut through the colony's outer defenses as if they were made of glass. Domes shattered, farms were destroyed, and vital systems went offline in seconds. Panic spread quickly among the population. People who had spent their entire lives believing in the security of Erindor suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Families were torn apart, children screamed, and emergency alarms blared continuously. The colony's communication system, which had once been a lifeline, was constantly under attack, making it nearly impossible to send out a coherent call for help. The leaders of Erindor were determined not to give in to fear. They organized evacuation routes, secured shelters, and tried to coordinate a defensive response using the colony's limited fleet. Pilots scrambled into battered ships, and militia groups armed with whatever weapons they could access prepared to hold off the attackers. Despite their courage and determination, they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Every day brought new losses, and every day the alien forces grew bolder. The situation was a test not just of their physical strength but of their will to survive. In the early hours of the conflict, many citizens watched as their homes and workplaces were obliterated. The skyline of Erindor, once filled with gleaming towers and domes, became a jagged silhouette of destruction. Fires burned uncontrollably, and the once bright lights of the city flickered and went dark. Amid this chaos, the people of Erindor sent messages into the void, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, would hear them. These were not ordinary distress calls. They were urgent, desperate pleas, crafted with emotion and fear, transmitted in every possible frequency that could reach human-controlled space. The messages told of families trapped beneath rubble, of sick and elderly unable to escape, of brave fighters holding their ground against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. There was no time for formalities. Every transmission carried the raw voice of survival. But space is vast, and even messages from one of humanity's most important colonies can get lost among countless signals, bouncing between stars and satellites. Days passed, and the people of Erindor waited anxiously, clinging to the hope that help would arrive. Every glimmer on the communication screen brought a brief surge of hope, only to end in despair when the signal faded or the system failed. During these first few weeks of the siege, the colonists began to truly understand the scale of the threat. The alien armada was not random. It was coordinated, strategic, and adaptive. Each attack seemed to anticipate the colony's defensive measures. Shields that had been strong yesterday were breached today. Supply lines were cut off, and internal communications were constantly jammed. The people realized they could not rely on their own strength alone. The situation forced them to confront the harsh reality that Erindor might not survive without outside intervention. Fear was no longer just a background emotion. It became a constant companion, shaping decisions, conversations, and even dreams. Parents feared for their children, doctors feared they could not save everyone, and leaders feared that their best strategies would not be enough. Despite the overwhelming fear, there was a spark of hope that refused to die. Stories of humanity's past victories, even in situations that seemed hopeless, circulated among the colonists. They remembered legends of the human fleet, which had historically been humanity's shield in times of extreme crisis. Tales of massive warships, advanced technology, and brilliant strategies inspired them, providing a mental lifeline. People held on to the belief that if humanity knew of their plight, help would come. This hope was fragile, but it was enough to keep the colony from falling into complete despair. Citizens worked tirelessly to protect what remained of their homes and families, improvising with what little resources they had left. The alien attackers, on the other hand, showed no mercy. Their strategy was clear: to demoralize the colony and force surrender. They struck key infrastructure first, then expanded attacks to residential areas, ensuring that no one felt safe anywhere. Hospitals, energy generators, and water treatment plants were targeted, making survival even harder. In these moments, ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of courage. Families worked together to shield each other. Community groups organized makeshift defenses, and even children found ways to help, whether by relaying messages or supporting the wounded. These small acts of heroism were unnoticed by the vastness of space but crucial to the colony's survival. Amid the attacks, the colony's scientists and engineers worked day and night to repair damaged systems. They rerouted power, built temporary shelters, and attempted to restore communication channels. Every success, no matter how small, became a celebration. Every setback was a reminder of the stakes. The colony's leaders frequently held emergency meetings, assessing resources, prioritizing safety, and making impossible choices. They knew that they were fighting not just for survival but for the very identity of Arendelle. Letting the colony fall would mean losing generations of human achievement and dreams, leaving the people as refugees scattered across hostile space. It was in these early days of crisis that humanity's reputation as a powerful, protective force in the galaxy became more than a story. For the first time, the people of Arendelle had to believe in something beyond themselves. They had to trust that their desperate pleas, transmitted through dangerous and unstable channels, would reach Earth or human command centers elsewhere. They were asking not just for military aid but for hope itself, for a reminder that they were not alone in the universe. This was a critical turning point because it showed the resilience and spirit of humanity, even in colonies far from the core of human civilization. The situation in Arendelle perfectly illustrated the fragility and resilience of life on the edge of human expansion. It highlighted the dangers of isolation in space but also the strength that comes from hope and courage. Each citizen, whether a leader, a soldier, a scientist, or a child, played a role in holding the colony together, and even though the threat seemed insurmountable, they did not give in to despair. Their actions and perseverance would set the stage for what was to come, a response that would change the course of the siege and demonstrate the full might of humanity's fleet. Even as the first part of this story unfolds, the people of Arendelle remain at the mercy of forces far beyond their control, yet they embody the essence of human endurance: hope in the face of overwhelming odds, determination in the darkest hours, and the belief that somewhere, help would arrive. Little did they know, the universe was about to witness a demonstration of humanity's deadliest strength, a fleet so powerful and precise that it would turn despair into salvation. But at this moment, in the shadow of fear and destruction, the colony's citizens had only their courage, their unity, and the hope that their calls would not go unanswered. As the first waves of alien attacks swept across Arendelle, the colony's citizens found themselves thrust into a reality that they had never imagined. Life as they knew it had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. Where once there had been laughter, busy streets, and the hum of daily life, there was now chaos, fear, and uncertainty. The early situation after the attacks was one of survival, adaptation, and desperate attempts to hold the colony together in the face of overwhelming odds. Every person in Arendelle had to quickly come to terms with the fact that they were no longer living in a safe, thriving settlements. They were under siege, trapped in a nightmare with no clear end in sight. In those initial days, the leaders of Arendelle worked tirelessly to understand the nature of the enemy. They quickly realized that the alien forces were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Their ships moved with incredible speed, almost as if they could predict the colony's every move. Their attacks were coordinated and intelligent, focusing on critical infrastructure first. Energy grids, communication hubs, water supply systems, and hospitals were the first targets. That aliens seemed to understand the colony's weaknesses almost instinctively, hitting areas that would cause maximum disruption and panic. It was as if they had studied human tactics in advance, anticipating every defensive maneuver and counterattack. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens were caught in a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Families scrambled to find shelter, carrying whatever possessions they could save. Children clung to their parents, frightened by the sounds of explosions and the sight of towering alien ships in the sky. People who had spent their entire lives in Arendelle suddenly had to make impossible decisions: which loved ones to save first, which buildings were safest, and how to reach emergency shelters before it was too late. Streets that had once been full of energy and activity were now silent except for the sound of alarms and distant blasts. Panic spread quickly, but so did acts of bravery. Neighbors helped neighbors, guiding the vulnerable to safety, sharing food, and offering comfort amidst the terror. The colony's limited defenses were mobilized as best they could. Arendelle had a small fleet of defensive starships primarily designed to patrol and protect the colony from minor threats. These ships were armed with energy cannons, missiles, and some defensive shields, but they were no match for the alien armada's advanced technology. Pilots were forced to fly missions that they knew could be fatal, intercepting alien vessels with courage and determination. Every successful defense, however small, became a symbol of hope for the people on the ground. The pilots were hailed as heroes, but they also carried the burden of knowing that their efforts, however brave, they could only delay the inevitable if reinforcements did not arrive. The leaders of the colony faced unimaginable pressure. They had to make strategic decisions in real time, balancing the safety of civilians with the need to defend critical infrastructure. Emergency meetings were held around the clock, with advisors, military officers, and scientists offering input. Some argued for a defensive stance, focusing on protecting as many people as possible. Others believed that a more aggressive approach at attacking alien ships when possible was necessary to slow the enemy and buy time for potential reinforcements. Every decision carried consequences, and the weight of responsibility was heavy on those making choices. Leaders had to remain calm and composed, even as their homes, workplaces, and neighborhoods were destroyed around them. During this period, the colony's scientists and engineers played a crucial role. They were responsible for repairing damaged systems, rerouting power, and improvising defenses. When energy grids were destroyed, they created temporary lines to supply power to hospitals and shelters. When communication systems failed, they built makeshift transmitters to continue sending distress signals. Each innovation was a small victory, but the engineers and scientists also understood that their work could only delay the inevitable unless help arrived from outside the colony. Despite the fear, they continued to work tirelessly, often sleeping only a few hours at a time, driven by a sense of duty to protect their fellow citizens. At the same time, the colony's civilians began to adapt to the new reality. People who had never been in combat or emergency situations suddenly found themselves performing tasks they had never imagined. Teachers helped organize children into safe groups, distributing food and water and keeping spirits high. Farmers who had grown crops for sustenance now worked to salvage what they could from destroyed fields, improvising with limited resources. Medical personnel was stretched beyond their limits, treating injuries, administering vaccines, and doing their best to prevent disease outbreaks in crowded shelters. Even children found ways to contribute, whether by carrying messages, assisting adults with small tasks, or simply offering comfort to those around them. These efforts created a sense of unity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humans could come together to survive. As days turned into weeks, the alien forces continued their attacks with increasing intensity. Their strategy became clearer. They were attempting to completely destabilize the colony, striking fear into the population and weakening their will to resist. Domes that had housed thousands of people were destroyed, leaving survivors exposed to harsh environments. Essential supply lines were cut, making food and water scarce. Hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties, and medical staff struggled to maintain care under impossible conditions. The constant attacks created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Every person was forced to live in a state of high alert, never knowing when the next strike would come or where it would hit. Despite the growing desperation, the people of Erenda refused to give up. Hope remained a driving force, however fragile it seemed. The colonists believed that if they could survive just a little longer, help would arrive. They sent continuous distress signals, broadcasting the dire situation to human command centers across the galaxy. Each transmission was an urgent plea, describing not only the destruction and danger but also the courage and resilience of the colony's inhabitants. These messages were their lifeline, a way to reach out to humanity and remind them that lives were at stake. Every person in Erenda hoped that someone would hear their cries and respond before it was too late. During this early stage of the conflict, the psychological toll on the population was immense. Fear and anxiety became constant companions. Many experienced sleepless nights, haunted by the sounds of explosions and the knowledge that their world was crumbling. Some struggled to maintain hope, while others became determined to survive at all costs. The community relied heavily on each other for support. Shared stories of bravery, acts of kindness, and small victories became essential to morale. Even in moments of despair, people found strength in unity, knowing that they were not alone in their fight for survival. The colony's leaders recognized the importance of maintaining morale. They broadcast messages of encouragement, reminding citizens of their resilience and the potential arrival of reinforcements. They emphasized that the colony had survived difficult situations before and could do so again, but they also did not sugarcoat the reality of the threat. Honesty and transparency became crucial tools in keeping the population focused and determined. Leaders walked among citizens, offering guidance, listening to concerns, and sharing in their fears. These personal interactions strengthened trust and created a sense of shared purpose in the face of adversity. One of the most striking aspects of this early situation was the way ordinary people rose to the occasion. Bakers, engineers, teachers, and shopkeepers suddenly found themselves performing heroic tasks. Some risked their lives to rescue neighbors trapped in collapsed buildings. Others worked around the clock to prepare shelters or distribute limited resources. Children, despite their fear, helped in small ways, bringing supplies or offering comfort to the wounded. These acts of courage were not grand or strategic in a military sense, but they were essential to survival. They demonstrated the human capacity for resilience, adaptability, and selflessness even in the most desperate circumstances. The early days of the siege also revealed the complexity of maintaining order in a colony under extreme stress. Law enforcement officers and security personnel had to manage not only external threats but also internal conflicts. With resources limited and tensions high, disagreements and panic sometimes led to disputes or chaos. Officers worked tirelessly to maintain calm, protect civilians, and ensure that the colony could continue to function despite the overwhelming challenges. Their efforts, often unseen and unacknowledged, were vital to the colony's survival. Through all of this, the alien attackers maintained a relentless pressure. They adapted to every defensive tactic, forced the colony into a reactive position, and seemed always one step ahead. The people of Arendar realized that their own capabilities, while impressive for a civilian colony, were not sufficient to repel such a threat. The early situation was a harsh reminder of the limits of human resources in isolation and the need for intervention by the broader human alliance. It became clear that survival depended not only on courage, ingenuity, and determination, but also on the arrival of external support. Even in this desperate period, glimmers of hope began to emerge. Pilots occasionally succeeded in damaging alien ships, engineers managed to restore critical systems, and civilians demonstrated extraordinary resilience. These small victories, though minor in the grand scheme, reinforced the belief that survival was possible. They also sent a signal to the colony that they were not powerless, that even in the face of a seemingly invincible enemy, human effort and ingenuity could make a difference. These moments of triumph, though brief, became beacons of hope in a sea of uncertainty. The people of Arendar had undergone a profound transformation. They had moved from a life of comfort and routine to one defined by survival, courage, and determination. The colony's leaders, civilians, pilots, and engineers had all been tested to their limits. They had faced fear, loss, and destruction, yet they had not given up. Every act of bravery, every innovation, and every successful defense reinforced the idea that humanity could endure even in the harshest conditions. The early situation of Arendar was a story of human resilience in its purest form. It demonstrated how people could adapt, persevere, and support each other under unimaginable stress. It set the stage for the coming weeks of conflict, highlighting both the vulnerability of the colony and the extraordinary courage of its inhabitants. Even as the alien forces continued their attacks, the people of Arendar held on to hope, determined to survive until help arrived, and ready to rise to the challenges that lay ahead. The days following the initial attacks on Arendar were marked not just by survival but by an escalation of conflict that seemed impossible to withstand. The alien forces, having gauged the colony's defensive capabilities during the first waves, adjusted their strategies with precision. They were no longer merely attacking randomly. Their strikes became calculated, relentless, and targeted. Their goal was clear: to break the spirit of the colony and crush any hope that humanity might come to their aid. Each day that passed, the attacks grew more intense, more destructive, and more frightening, pushing the people of Arendar to the very edge of endurance. In the early stages of this rising conflict, the colony's leaders attempted to maintain a semblance of control. They held daily briefings with military officers, scientists, engineers, and civic leaders to plan defensive actions and prioritize resources. But as the alien forces became more organized, it became clear that the colony's limited fleet and infrastructure could not withstand sustained assaults. Ships were destroyed faster than they could be repaired, energy shields failed repeatedly, and critical systems like communication and water purification were under constant threat. Every decision carried weighty consequences, and mistakes could mean death for hundreds of citizens. The leaders had to remain calm and strategic, even as fear gnawed at their own resolve. The civilians too felt the mounting tension. Families huddled in underground shelters, listening to the distant sounds of explosions and the rumble of alien ships overhead. Children who had initially relied on the protection of adults began to understand the danger around them. Some cried in fear, while others remained unusually quiet, trying to help in small ways, carrying supplies, or assisting those injured during the attacks. Adults moved with a combination of determination and desperation, trying to maintain routines and safety while coping with the constant threat of death. The colony's community began to display extraordinary resilience, working together to adapt to the ever-changing dangers. Yet, the psychological toll was enormous. Sleep became a luxury, fear a constant companion, and hope a fragile but necessary flame. One of the most dangerous aspects of this period was the alien focus on cutting off the colony's supplies and resources. Food storage facilities, hydroponic farms, and water reserves were primary targets. With each successful strike, the population faced scarcity and hunger. Civilians who had once enjoyed an abundance of resources were now forced to ration their meals, making difficult choices about who received what and when. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to repair damaged systems and create temporary solutions, but their efforts were constantly challenged by the relentless pace of the alien attacks. Every small victory in maintaining life support systems became crucial for survival. Meanwhile, the colony's defensive forces were pushed to the limits. Pilots who had previously flown patrol missions now faced daily combat, engaging in daring maneuvers to intercept the alien ships. Their courage and skill were extraordinary, yet each encounter carried a high risk. The alien fleet was not only technologically superior but also adaptive, learning from the colony's tactics and countering them quickly. Every dogfight and defensive action became a high-stakes battle, testing the limits of human ingenuity and bravery. Some pilots made the ultimate sacrifice, their names and heroism remembered by the survivors as symbols of the colony's unyielding spirit. The rising conflict also forced the colony to confront internal challenges. Fear and stress led to arguments and panic in certain quarters. People who had never known combat or crisis situations struggled to cope with the constant threat. Some questioned leadership decisions, while others acted impulsively in desperation to protect themselves and their families. Maintaining order became a critical task for the colony's leaders, who understood that internal chaos could be as dangerous as the external threat. Law enforcement and security teams worked tirelessly to maintain calm, enforce evacuation procedures, and prevent panic from undermining the colony's survival efforts. During this time, the aliens intensified their psychological warfare. Propaganda messages, sometimes transmitted through hijacked communication channels, were used to demoralize the colonists. These messages portrayed humanity as weak, doomed, and incapable of providing rescue. The intent was to erode hope and force surrender. Yet, in spite of these attempts, the people of Erinda clung stubbornly to hope. Community bonds grew stronger as individuals supported each other emotionally, shared scarce resources, and offered comfort to the frightened. Each act of kindness and courage reinforced the collective determination to survive, creating a sense of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. The colony's engineers and scientists became increasingly innovative during this period. Traditional defenses were no longer sufficient, so they began creating improvised systems and strategies to counter alien tactics. They repurposed civilian drones for reconnaissance, modified energy systems to create temporary shields, and devised methods to detect alien ship movements more effectively. These adaptations were small victories, but each one helped buy time and saved lives. Their work was relentless, often continuing through long hours of fatigue, danger, and the constant threat of attack. Despite the exhaustion and stress, the engineers' dedication inspired hope among the colony's citizens, proving that human ingenuity could stand even against seemingly insurmountable threats. As the conflict escalated, supply shortages became more severe. Medical personnel faced overwhelming challenges as hospitals were inundated with casualties. Doctors and nurses worked around the clock, often improvising treatments due to a lack of proper equipment and supplies. They had to make life and death decisions with limited information and resources, a responsibility that weighed heavily on them. Despite these hardships, medical teams remained resolute, driven by a sense of duty and compassion. Their dedication became a lifeline for many, demonstrating the courage and resilience of ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances. Communication with human command centers became increasingly critical during this phase. The colony's distress signals were transmitted repeatedly, detailing the attacks, casualties, and the urgent need for reinforcements. Scientists and engineers worked to repair damaged transmitters, ensuring that messages could get through despite interference from alien forces. These communications were a vital thread connecting the besieged colony to the broader human network, providing a slim hope that aid would eventually arrive. Each successful transmission was a small victory, a reminder that the colony was not entirely alone in the vast expanse of space. Meanwhile, the aliens adapted to the colony's evolving defenses. They deployed specialized strike teams to target key leadership locations, attempting to disrupt command and decision. These attacks created moments of panic and confusion, testing the resolve of leaders and civilians alike. Yet the colony's command structure proved resilient. Leaders worked together, maintaining coordination under pressure and ensuring that decisions were implemented swiftly despite the chaos. Their ability to remain effective under fire became a testament to human determination and strategic thinking, even when facing a technologically superior adversary. During this rising conflict, stories of heroism and sacrifice emerged. Individuals risked their lives to protect others, often performing extraordinary feats in the midst of danger. Civilians guided the injured to safety. Pilots intercepted alien ships despite overwhelming odds, and engineers restored critical systems under fire. These acts of bravery were not isolated, they were a reflection of a community bound together by shared struggle and determination. Each moment of courage reinforced hope, demonstrating that even in dire circumstances, the human spirit could endure and fight back. Fear and anxiety remained constant companions, but so did resourcefulness and ingenuity. The people of Erinda learned to adapt quickly, using every available tool and skill to survive. Improvised shelters were constructed, supply distribution systems were organized under extreme pressure, and civilians took on roles beyond their usual responsibilities. Teachers, farmers, engineers, and children all contributed to the survival of the colony in meaningful ways. This adaptability became a key factor in sustaining life under siege. showing that survival depended not only on technology and weapons but on the creativity and resilience of people themselves. As the days and weeks passed, the rising conflict forced the colony to confront difficult ethical decisions. With limited resources, leaders and civilians alike had to decide who would receive aid, how to ration supplies, and which areas of the colony to prioritize for defense. These decisions were agonizing, yet necessary. They highlighted the harsh realities of survival under extreme conditions, testing the moral and emotional strength of the people. Each choice carried consequences, and the weight of responsibility was felt by everyone involved. Yet even in these moments, the community displayed extraordinary empathy and cooperation, striving to protect as many lives as possible despite the dire circumstances. The alien forces, relentless in their assaults, continued to push the colony toward the brink of collapse. Every defensive success by Arendar was met with a more aggressive counterattack. The invaders adapted quickly, learning from human tactics and exploiting weaknesses wherever they could. Yet, even as the situation grew increasingly dire, the people of the colony refused to give in. Hope, though fragile, remained a guiding force. Every act of resistance, every repaired system, and every rescued individual became a small but vital victory in the broader struggle for survival. In these moments, the human spirit shone brightest. Civilians, pilots, engineers, medical personnel, and leaders all contributed in ways that transcended their individual roles. They learned to rely on each other, to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, and to find courage even when fear threatened to overwhelm them. The rising conflict tested their limits physically, mentally, and emotionally, yet it also revealed the depth of human resilience and solidarity. Every obstacle faced and overcome reinforced the belief that survival was possible. Even in the face of an overwhelmingly powerful adversary, the colony of Arendar had transformed. It was no longer merely a settlement of people living in peace. It had become a fortress of human determination, a symbol of resilience in the face of extraordinary danger. The rising conflict had revealed the colony's vulnerabilities, but it had also demonstrated the strength, ingenuity, and courage of its citizens. Every person, whether fighting on the front lines or supporting the community behind the scenes, had contributed to the ongoing struggle. Together they had held the colony together, buying time and preserving hope while waiting for the possibility of reinforcements from the broader human fleet. The rising conflict phase was more than a battle for survival, it was a test of humanity itself. It showed that even when confronted with overwhelming technological superiority and relentless attacks, people could adapt, resist, and maintain hope. It highlighted the extraordinary courage found in ordinary individuals and the importance of unity, creativity, and determination in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The citizens of Arendar had endured immense challenges, but their resilience set the stage for what was to come, a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the colony, but the enduring power of human courage and the response of humanity at large. The situation in Arendar had been worsening for weeks, and the people were exhausted. What began as a shocking attack had turned into an unrelenting siege, and the colony was reaching a point where hope itself seemed fragile. Every day brought new destruction, new loss, and new challenges that tested the limits of human endurance. The alien forces had become increasingly aggressive, adapting to every defensive strategy, finding weaknesses in even the most careful plans. The colony, once bustling with life and ambition, now resembled a battlefield strewn with debris and chaos. People had grown accustomed to fear as a constant companion, and survival was no longer guaranteed. It was a struggle against overwhelming odds. The breaking point arrived gradually, not with a single event, but as a combination of circumstances that left the colony teetering on the edge of collapse. It began with the destruction of the colony's central energy hub, a facility that supplied power to nearly all of Arendar's critical systems. The explosion created a massive blackout, plunging entire districts into darkness. Alarms blared intermittently, warning of fires, structural failures, and system malfunctions. The blackout severely hampered communication, leaving leaders unable to coordinate defenses or contact human command for assistance. For the citizens, the sudden loss of power was terrifying. People struggled to navigate dark streets, evacuate from dangerous areas, and locate loved ones. It was a moment that symbolized how close Arendar was to complete destruction. As the blackout spread, the alien forces escalated their attacks. Strike teams targeted residential zones, hospitals, and supply depots. These attacks were precise, almost surgical, demonstrating that the invaders had a deep understanding of the colony's structure and vulnerabilities. Buildings that had survived initial assaults were now collapsing under repeated bombardment. Fires spread rapidly, consuming what remained of homes and public spaces. The destruction was both physical and psychological. Citizens were forced to witness the decimation of their world, while grappling with the sense of helplessness that came from being outmatched and outnumbered. Fear was no longer occasional, it had become an unyielding presence, pressing down on every decision, every movement, and every thought at the same time. The colony faced a critical shortage of supplies. Food, water, and medical resources were almost exhausted, The rationing systems that had helped sustain the population were stretched beyond their limits. People had to make impossible choices about who received nourishment and who went without. Hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties, and doctors and nurses worked tirelessly in impossible conditions. Injured citizens waited hours or even days for treatment, and medical personnel were forced to prioritize based on survival chances rather than need. The strain on resources intensified the stress of the population, creating an atmosphere where panic and despair threatened to take hold. The breaking point was not only physical but also emotional and psychological. Citizens who had remained strong for weeks began to falter. Children cried inconsolably, families argued over survival decisions, and even the most experienced leaders felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like a heavy stone. The continuous fear, loss, and uncertainty created a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Many began to doubt whether anyone would come to save them, whether humanity's legendary fleet would respond, or whether their pleas had been heard at all. It was in these moments that the strength of the colony's community was tested more than ever. Despite the overwhelming adversity, acts of bravery and solidarity continued to shine. Civilians organized volunteer teams to help the injured and search for survivors in collapsed buildings. Pilots risked their lives on dangerous sorties, attempting to slow the alien advance even as their ships were outmatched. Engineers worked through exhaustion, often under fire, to restore critical systems and maintain communication channels. Every act of courage, no matter how small, became a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dire situation. These efforts, though heroic, were not enough to reverse the tide. The colony was still under immense threat, and the breaking point loomed closer with each passing day. As the situation reached critical levels, some citizens began to consider surrender as the only viable option. The aliens' relentless strategy had created conditions in which survival seemed unlikely. Families feared for their children, individuals feared for their own lives, and even leaders wondered if further resistance was futile. The thought of surrender brought mixed emotions, relief at the possibility of survival but shame and fear at the loss of dignity and autonomy. These internal conflicts weighed heavily on the community, creating tension and uncertainty about what the right course of action should be. The alien forces intensified their psychological warfare, targeting the colony's morale. Messages were transmitted through hijacked channels, claiming that no help would arrive, that humanity was too weak or slow to respond, and that resistance was futile. The aliens attempted to break the citizens' spirit as much as their physical defenses. For some, these messages planted seeds of despair, making them question whether survival was even possible. Yet for others, they ignited a stubborn determination, a refusal to yield to fear or manipulation. It became clear that the breaking point was not just about physical destruction. It was about testing the limits of human willpower and unity. As the colony approached this critical threshold, the alien strategy became even more aggressive. They deployed special strike units to target key leadership centers, aiming to disrupt decision-making and create chaos within the colony. Leadership teams were forced to operate from underground bunkers, coordinating responses through improvised communication networks. The stakes could not have been higher. Failure in coordination would mean not only more casualties but potentially the total collapse of the colony's resistance. Leaders had to remain calm and decisive, even as the world around them seemed to fall apart. Their ability to maintain focus under pressure became a lifeline for the entire population. The citizens themselves demonstrated extraordinary resilience in this period, despite the constant fear and exhaustion. Volunteer groups organized search and rescue missions in dangerous areas, risking injury or death to save neighbors. Families worked together to create safe zones, sharing scarce resources and protecting children and the elderly. Medical personnel continued to provide care in makeshift hospitals, improvising treatments with whatever tools were available. Engineers repaired critical infrastructure under fire, ensuring that power, water, and communication systems continued to function. These acts of courage and selflessness were vital in keeping the colony from succumbing entirely to despair. The colony's distress signals were sent repeatedly, describing not only the destruction but also the determination of the people to survive. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair transmitters and maintain contact, knowing that even a single successful transmission could mean the difference between life and death. Each message was a plea for rescue, a desperate call to humanity to recognize the urgency of the situation and respond with force before it was too late. The success or failure of these communications weighed heavily on the minds of the leaders and the citizens alike. The alien attacks created extreme environmental hazards within the colony. Fires raged uncontrolled, releasing toxic smoke into the air. Structural collapses created unstable ruins, and damaged energy systems emitted dangerous surges. Citizens navigated these hazards as best they could, often improvising tools and methods to survive. The danger was everywhere, constant, and unpredictable. People who had once felt secure in their homes now faced life or death challenges at every turn. Yet, in spite of these threats, the community adapted, finding ways to survive in impossible conditions. Their ingenuity and courage were remarkable, demonstrating the human capacity to endure even when the environment itself turns hostile. As resources dwindled and casualties mounted, the breaking point approached its peak. Leaders faced impossible choices, deciding who would receive medical care, which areas to prioritize for defense, and how to allocate limited supplies. Families faced similar dilemmas, struggling to protect their loved ones with insufficient resources. The stress and fear were overwhelming. Yet these decisions were made with a shared goal: to preserve as many lives as possible until help arrived. The colony's cohesion, forged through weeks of struggle, was tested like never before, and the people's ability to remain united was crucial to survival. Then came the moment when the alien forces captured one of the colony's main command hubs. This was a devastating blow. The hub had been a critical center for communication, strategy, and coordination. Its capture disrupted the colony's ability to respond effectively, creating confusion and panic. Citizens feared that this event marked the end of organized resistance, that the aliens had finally broken the colony's spirit. Yet even in this darkest moment, the leaders refused to give in. Emergency protocols were activated, secondary command centers took over, and communication lines were rerouted through underground networks. The resilience of the colony's leadership became a beacon of hope for the citizens, demonstrating that even in moments of extreme crisis, human determination could endure. It was at this precise moment that the true significance of the breaking point became clear. The colony had reached the edge of despair, a moment where surrender seemed almost inevitable, and yet the people's will to survive had not been extinguished. Fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty pressed down on them from all sides. But the bonds of community, courage, and hope remained. Leaders, civilians, and volunteers continued to act with determination, showing that humanity's strength is not only measured in technology or weapons but in resilience, ingenuity, and unity in the face of overwhelming danger. As the alien forces pressed their advantage, the citizens of Arendar clung to the hope that humanity's legendary fleet would respond. They had sent countless distress signals, broadcasted messages of their plight, and demonstrated that even under impossible circumstances, they had not given up. This hope became a quiet guiding force, a reminder that survival depended not only on individual courage but on the possibility of aid arriving from beyond the stars. Even in the midst of collapse and destruction, the people refused to surrender completely. Holding on to the belief that they were not alone in the universe, it revealed the limits of physical, emotional, and psychological strength, while also highlighting the extraordinary capacity for adaptation, ingenuity, and unity. The citizens of Arendar had faced unimaginable loss, constant danger, and extreme adversity, yet they continued to fight, survive, and maintain hope. This period set the stage for the arrival of the human fleet, demonstrating that, even at the edge of despair, humanity could endure and respond to crisis in ways that would alter the course of events. Arendar had been pushed to its limits. Its infrastructure was heavily damaged, its population exhausted, and its leaders under immense pressure. Yet the colony had not fallen completely. The breaking point had been reached, but in the human spirit, a spark remained, a spark that would soon ignite into hope and action with the arrival of help from beyond, changing the course of the conflict and ensuring that the courage, resilience, and determination of the people of Arendar would not be in vain. The turning point for Arendar came in a way that no one in the colony had dared to imagine during their darkest hours. Just when fear, exhaustion, and despair had begun to weigh unbearably on every person, a distant glimmer appeared on the horizon. At first it was a faint, almost imperceptible series of lights that slowly grew brighter, moving with precision and purpose. The citizens had been through countless false alarms, moments when they had hoped for rescue only to be disappointed. Yet something about these lights felt different, intentional, organized, and unmistakably human. It was the legendary fleet they had prayed for, the fleet humanity had built to protect its colonies and respond to the most desperate situations. The arrival of the fleet instantly transformed the atmosphere of Arendar from fear and despair to cautious hope. The alien forces, who had believed their siege would end in total victory, were caught off guard. They had expected to crush the colony before any reinforcements could arrive, assuming that the humans would remain trapped and isolated. Instead, they were confronted by a massive, highly coordinated armada, far larger and more advanced than anything Arendar had seen before. Ships of incredible size and power moved in formation, deploying energy shields, advanced weapons, and precise tactical drones. The sudden appearance of the fleet was not just a physical threat to the aliens, it was a psychological shock. The invaders had been confident in their superiority, and now they faced an enemy whose reputation alone had struck fear across galaxies. Within the colony, emotions ran high. Families who had clung to each other in fear now stared in awe at the sight of the fleet, descending through the sky and space above them. Children pressed against the walls of shelters to get a glimpse of the massive ships. Pilots and engineers looked to the horizon with renewed determination, and leaders felt the weight of despair lift slightly. Replaced by the responsibility of coordinating with the arriving forces, the citizens of Arendar had survived long enough to witness the full might of humanity responding to their pleas, and the shift in morale was immediate. For the first time in weeks, laughter and relief mixed with the adrenaline of preparation that the human fleet acted with precision. Scouts and reconnaissance drones were deployed to assess the alien positions and movements, gathering critical information in real time. Meanwhile, massive warships positioned themselves strategically around Arenda, creating a protective perimeter. The fleet was not just powerful, it was intelligent, coordinated, and adaptable. Commanders communicated seamlessly across vessels, adjusting tactics to counter the alien strategy. The result was a carefully orchestrated plan to neutralize the alien threat while minimizing risk to the colony itself. Every move was calculated, deliberate, and executed with extraordinary skill. The initial engagement between the human fleet and the alien forces was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Energy beams streaked across the sky, explosions rocked the outskirts of the colony, and starships collided in bursts of light and fire. The aliens, taken aback by the sudden arrival and immense firepower, struggled to adjust their tactics. The human fleet exploited every weakness they could identify, striking with overwhelming precision. Small groups of alien ships were isolated and destroyed. Supply lines were severed and command units were neutralized. It was clear that the tide of the battle had turned. Where previously the aliens had dictated the terms of the conflict, now the humans had seized control. On the ground, the citizens of Arenda watched as hope became reality. Rescue teams descended from the fleet, landing at key points to evacuate survivors, provide medical care, and restore order. These teams worked quickly and efficiently, demonstrating the full scope of humanity's capability. Engineers and soldiers collaborated to repair damaged infrastructure, re-establish communications, and restore essential services. Medical personnel from the fleet supplemented the colony's overwhelmed hospitals, attending to the injured and providing critical supplies. The presence of the fleet transformed the battlefield from one of chaos and fear into a controlled operation, giving the citizens a sense of security they had not felt in weeks. The aliens, realizing that their strategy had failed, attempted to retreat and regroup, but the human fleet was relentless. Advanced tracking systems and tactical drones prevented their escape, targeting key ships and forcing them into disarray. Every retreating maneuver was countered, and the alien forces suffered catastrophic losses. It was not merely a battle of weapons but a demonstration of superior strategy, coordination, and determination. The human fleet showed that it was not only a defensive force but an offensive one capable of decisively ending threats. The colony watched in awe as centuries of human military expertise unfolded in real time, protecting them from a danger that had once seemed unstoppable. The resolution of the conflict also highlighted the ingenuity and courage of the colony's own citizens. Throughout the engagement, local volunteers, militia, and remaining pilots contributed to the defense effort. Some provided real-time intelligence about alien positions, guiding the fleet to vulnerable targets. Engineers continued to maintain critical infrastructure under pressure, ensuring that power, water, and communications were operational. Civilians aided rescue teams by assisting the injured, clearing debris and supporting emergency operations. The collaboration between the colony and the fleet demonstrated the power of human unity, showing that even in the most dire circumstances, cooperation and courage could amplify strength. As the alien forces were systematically neutralized, the citizens of Arenda began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. The fleet's intervention had not only saved the colony, but had also ensured that the invaders would not return in the near future. Entire alien squadrons had been destroyed, supply chains obliterated, and command units dismantled. The victory was overwhelming, yet carefully measured humanity had acted decisively, but with a focus on preserving life and infrastructure where possible. It was a reminder that power, when combined with intelligence and responsibility, could protect and restore hope in the most desperate situations. The aftermath of the battle brought immediate relief but also significant work. Rescue operations continued for hours, extracting survivors trapped in collapsed buildings and hazardous areas. Medical teams treated the wounded, distributed food and water, and began restoring health services. Engineers repaired damaged systems, while security personnel maintained order to prevent chaos. Citizens who had spent weeks in fear finally emerged from shelters to witness the scale of destruction and the efforts to rebuild. The sight of the fleet remaining above the colony, guarding against potential threats, provided reassurance and a sense of security that had been absent for far too long. Leaders and citizens alike recognized that the colony's survival was not solely due to the fleet but also to the determination, ingenuity, and bravery of its inhabitants. Pilots who had risked their lives, engineers who had worked tirelessly, medical teams who had faced impossible conditions, and civilians who had supported each other in every way imaginable had all played critical roles. The fleet's arrival magnified these efforts, turning weeks of struggle into a definitive victory. Every contribution, whether from the colony or the fleet, had been essential in achieving the resolution. The psychological impact of the fleet's intervention was profound. Where once the citizens had felt trapped, abandoned, and powerless, they now felt hope, security, and pride. Families reunited, and the sounds of joy and relief replaced the constant alarms and explosions that had defined life under siege. Children laughed and played again, while adults assessed damage and began planning for reconstruction. Even amidst the ruins, the presence of the fleet and the knowledge that humanity would intervene in times of desperate need inspired a renewed sense of confidence. The colony had not only survived, it had witnessed firsthand the capability and commitment of humanity to protect its own. In the days following the battle, the human fleet remained in the sector to ensure the alien forces could not return. Patrols monitored surrounding space, keeping a watchful eye for any signs of retaliation. Fleet engineers collaborated with the colony's teams to restore essential infrastructure more permanently, while military personnel trained local defenders to better prepare for future threats. This comprehensive approach ensured that Arendelle was not only rescued but also strengthened, leaving it more resilient and better prepared than ever before. The resolution was not a single event but a series of coordinated actions that combined military force, strategic planning, and human ingenuity. The citizens of Arendelle also began to understand the broader significance of the resolution. Their survival and the fleet's decisive actions sent a clear message to other human colonies and potential threats. Humanity would respond with overwhelming force to protect its people. The legendary reputation of the fleet had been realized in action, demonstrating not only technological superiority but also the unwavering commitment of humanity to preserve life. For the citizens, this was more than reassurance. It was a confirmation that their struggles, courage, and perseverance had been recognized and valued by the larger human network. Arendelle had transitioned from a colony under siege to a community actively rebuilding and regaining control of its destiny. The alien threat had been eliminated, the fleet had secured the area, and the citizens had demonstrated extraordinary resilience and courage. The resolution was both a practical and symbolic victory. It restored safety and order, healed psychological trauma, and affirmed the enduring power of human unity, ingenuity, and determination. Every survivor, every volunteer, every leader, and every member of the fleet had contributed to this outcome, proving that even in the darkest times, humanity could rise to meet any challenge. The resolution phase marked a moment of profound transformation. From near annihilation to protection and rebuilding, Arendelle's story reflected the immense capacity of humans to survive, adapt, and overcome. The combination of the fleet's arrival, the strategic dismantling of the alien forces, and the collaborative efforts of the colony's citizens ensured that the conflict ended not just in survival but in triumph. The lessons learned, the courage displayed, and the hope restored became the foundation for a future where Arendelle could thrive once more, forever marked by the power of resilience and the decisive intervention of humanity's deadliest fleet. The battle for Arendelle was over, but its impact lingered in every corner of the colony. The citizens emerged from the wreckage to a world that had been transformed, both physically and emotionally. Buildings were damaged, streets were scarred, and remnants of alien attacks remained visible everywhere. Fires had been extinguished, energy systems were being restored, and emergency shelters had been set up for families who had lost their homes. Yet the most profound changes were not just in the structures of the colony, but in the minds and hearts of the people. Every survivor carried memories of fear, bravery, loss, and hope, experiences that would shape their lives forever. The aftermath was a time of reflection, understanding, and a slow process of rebuilding not just the colony, but the very spirit of its people. In the days following the resolution, the colony's leaders and human fleet personnel worked together to assess the full extent of the damage. Teams of engineers, scientists, and construction crews moved systematically through the streets, inspecting buildings for structural integrity, repairing vital energy lines, and clearing debris from essential pathways. Water purification systems were restored first, ensuring that the population had access to safe drinking water. Hospitals received additional supplies from the fleet, and medical teams worked tirelessly to treat injuries, both physical and psychological. The scope of the destruction was enormous, but the response was equally impressive. There was a sense of organized determination, a careful balance between urgency and precision, as everyone recognized the importance of restoring normalcy as quickly as possible. Amidst the rebuilding, the people of Arendelle had time to reflect on the events they had endured. Many thought back to the moments of extreme fear during the alien siege, the dark nights spent hiding in shelters, the sounds of explosions echoing through the streets, the uncertainty of whether loved ones would survive. These memories were painful, yet they also highlighted the courage and resilience that had emerged. Families had fought to stay together, children had shown remarkable adaptability, and ordinary citizens had performed extraordinary acts of bravery. Every person had been tested in ways they had never imagined, and the reflection on these experiences became a crucial part of the healing process. One of the most striking reflections came from the colony's young people, many of whom had been children when the attacks began. They had witnessed destruction on an unimaginable scale, yet they had also seen the very best of humanity: courage, selflessness, and cooperation. Some had assisted in rescue efforts, helped carry supplies, or offered comfort to frightened peers. Their experiences during the siege became formative lessons in responsibility, compassion, and resilience. They learned that even in situations where hope seemed lost, individual actions could make a difference, and that unity and cooperation could overcome even the most terrifying challenges. These lessons would shape their worldview and future contributions to the colony for years to come. Adults reflected on the decisions they had made during the crisis. Leaders thought about the choices that had carried lives on the line, weighing success against the costs of failure. Civilians recalled the moments when they had acted without hesitation to protect neighbors or family members. Pilots, engineers, and medical personnel remembered the risks they had taken, the exhaustion they had endured, and the determination that had kept them going. These reflections were tinged with grief for those lost, but also pride in the collective, the strength and resilience that had carried the colony through its darkest hours. Every person recognized that survival had been a combination of human ingenuity, courage, and the timely intervention of the fleet. The citizens also reflected on the alien forces they had faced. The invaders had been intelligent, adaptive, and terrifyingly powerful, yet they had been overcome through a combination of human determination, strategy, and technological might. People considered the lessons learned from facing such a superior enemy, the importance of preparedness, the value of strategic alliances, and the need for continuous innovation in defense. The experience left a lasting impression on the colony, shaping how they would approach security, training, and emergency planning in the future. They understood that threats of unimaginable scale could arise without warning, and that vigilance, unity, and courage would always be necessary to survive and thrive. Amidst the reflections, there was also an acute awareness of loss. Families mourned loved ones who had been lost in the initial attacks or during the prolonged siege. Buildings, homes, and businesses that had taken decades to construct were destroyed. Dreams that had seemed secure were shattered in an instant. Yet even in the face of grief, the community demonstrated resilience. Citizens supported each other, shared stories of those who had passed, and found ways to honor their memories. Memorials were planned, and moments of silence were observed across the colony to acknowledge the cost of survival. These acts of remembrance were not only for the lost but also a reaffirmation of the values that had allowed Arendar to endure. The arrival of the human fleet during the crisis also became a central point of reflection. Citizens marveled at the scale, precision, and power of the reinforcements. They considered the sacrifices made by the fleet personnel, the risk they had taken to protect a distant colony, and the coordination required to defeat the alien forces. This reinforced a sense of connection to humanity as a whole, reminding the people of Arendar that they were part of something larger than themselves. The fleet's intervention was both a practical rescue and a symbolic statement. Humanity would respond to its own in times of extreme need. The reflection on this fact strengthened the colony's trust in human unity and collaboration across vast distances. Rebuilding Arendar also prompted reflection on ingenuity and adaptation. Citizens recognized that their survival had depended not only on the fleet but on their own ability to improvise and innovate. Engineers had created temporary systems to replace damaged infrastructure. Medical teams had devised new ways to treat the injured, and civilians had found creative solutions to navigate dangerous conditions. These actions demonstrated that resourcefulness, courage, and adaptability were just as important as raw power in ensuring survival. The reflection on these efforts highlighted human creativity and resilience, inspiring a renewed commitment to innovation and problem-solving in the post-crisis colony. The psychological and emotional aftermath required as much attention as the physical rebuilding. Counseling and support networks were established to help individuals cope with trauma. Citizens processed feelings of fear, grief, and relief, often sharing their experiences with neighbors and friends. Support groups allowed people to recount acts of bravery, moments of despair, and the personal challenges they had overcome. These conversations were vital, not only for healing but for reinforcing a sense of community. The shared experiences of fear, courage, and survival created bonds that would endure long after the immediate crisis had passed. Reflection on the emotional journey emphasized the strength and resilience of the human spirit in even the most extreme circumstances. Education and storytelling became a key part of the aftermath. Teachers, historians, and community leaders began documenting the events of the siege, ensuring that the lessons learned would be preserved for future generations. Children and young adults were taught about the courage and ingenuity of their families and neighbors, as well as the broader significance of human solidarity in overcoming extraordinary challenges. Stories of heroism, resilience, and hope became central to the colony's identity, providing a framework for understanding their own strength and potential. Reflection through storytelling allowed the community to transform trauma into knowledge and inspiration. The reflection period also prompted practical changes in the colony's infrastructure and preparedness. Engineers, architects, and city planners worked with leaders to develop more resilient structures capable of withstanding potential future threats. Emergency response systems were upgraded, shelters were reinforced, and communication networks were redesigned for reliability under stress. Lessons learned from the siege were incorporated into every aspect of the colony's operations, ensuring that Arendar would be better prepared in the event of another attack. Reflection on the past became a foundation for future resilience, transforming a period of crisis into an opportunity for growth and improvement. Amid the physical and emotional rebuilding, citizens reflected on the broader meaning of survival and community. They realized that Erinda's endurance had depended on the contributions of everyone from leaders and pilots to engineers, doctors, and ordinary civilians. Acts of courage, cooperation, and compassion had made the difference between life and death. Reflection on this unity fostered a renewed sense of pride in the community, emphasizing that collective strength and mutual support were essential to overcoming even the most overwhelming challenges. The aftermath was not just a time of repair, but a reaffirmation of human values and interconnectedness. The fleet's continued presence in orbit allowed the colony to plan for the future with renewed confidence. Citizens understood that while the immediate threat had passed, the galaxy remained full of dangers. Reflection on this reality encouraged long-term thinking, better defenses, improved training for pilots and emergency personnel, and strengthened alliances with other human colonies. The lessons of the siege became a guiding framework for Erinda's development, blending practical preparation with the recognition of human courage and ingenuity. This dual focus on readiness and reflection ensured that the colony could not only survive future threats but also thrive despite them. As weeks turned into months, the colony slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Streets were cleared, energy systems stabilized, schools reopened, and commerce gradually resumed. Citizens reflected on their journey, comparing the life they had known before the attacks to the one they were rebuilding. They recognized that while much had been lost, the experience had forged resilience, strengthened community bonds, and instilled a profound appreciation for life, cooperation, and courage. Reflection became a tool for gratitude, helping people acknowledge both the cost of survival and the extraordinary capabilities that had enabled it. Even in moments of leisure or routine, the people of Erinda carried the lessons of the siege. Conversations often returned to stories of bravery, clever solutions, and narrow escapes. These reflections became part of the colony's identity, shaping the way individuals thought about their own potential and the power of collective effort. The memory of the fleet's arrival, the courage of volunteers, and the ingenuity of engineers served as enduring reminders that humanity could confront even the most terrifying challenges when united by purpose, hope, and determination. The aftermath and reflection phase also allowed for philosophical consideration. Citizens wondered about the nature of courage, the meaning of survival, and humanity's place in a galaxy filled with both danger and possibility. They considered how fear could motivate or paralyze, how unity could overcome power, and how hope could persist even in extreme darkness. These reflections became part of a broader understanding of life in the universe, influencing future decisions, priorities, and aspirations for both the colony and humanity as a whole. Erinda had transformed from a colony under siege into a community defined by resilience, courage, and hope. The aftermath was a time of rebuilding, not just of buildings, but of lives, relationships, and understanding. Reflection allowed the citizens to process their experiences, honor those who had been lost, celebrate acts of bravery, and learn lessons for the future. The events of the siege, once a source of fear and trauma, became a source of wisdom and inspiration. Erinda's survival was a testament to human strength, ingenuity, and unity, a story that would be remembered, shared, and passed down for generations to come. The reflection on what had occurred reminded everyone that even in the face of unimaginable danger, humanity's greatest weapons were not only technology or firepower, but courage, cooperation, and the determination to endure. Erinda had faced its darkest hour, but in surviving, it became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The citizens knew that the galaxy was vast and threats could arise again, but they also knew that together, with ingenuity, bravery, and unity, they could face whatever came next.